I ruined my sister's wedding and don't regret it. I stood there, microphone in hand, watching my sister's face drain of all color. 200 guests, dead silence. And I knew there was no taking back what I just said. But here's the thing everyone needs to understand. I didn't ruin her wedding out of spite. I ruined it because I finally saw the pattern. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, we dive deep into the most mind-bending, heart-wrenching stories from Reddit. The ones that make you question everything you thought you knew about the people in your life. And today we've got one that's going to stick with you long after this video ends. Before we get into it, do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy these deep dive story analyses. And here's the thing I want you to keep in mind as we go through this. Family dynamics are complicated. What looks like jealousy from the outside might be something else entirely. What seems like betrayal might actually be self-preservation. This story comes from a throwaway account. Let's call our narrator Daniel. And Daniel begins his post with a confession that immediately got thousands of upvotes and hundreds of comments arguing about whether he's a hero or a monster. He says, "I ruined my sister's wedding 3 weeks ago, and I don't regret it. Everyone in my family has cut me off. My parents won't speak to me. My sister's husband's family threatened legal action. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat because what I discovered wasn't just about one day, it was about my entire life." All right, let's unpack this. Daniel starts by painting a picture of his family dynamic, and honestly, on the surface, it sounds pretty normal. He's 32, works as an accountant. Steady job, stable life, nothing flashy. His sister Melissa is 28. And according to Daniel, Melissa has always been, well, let me just read what he wrote. Melissa was the golden child. I don't mean that in a bitter way. It's just fact. She was the homecoming queen in high school. She got a full scholarship to a prestigious university. She dated the captain of the football team, then the president of her sorority's brother fraternity, then eventually Marcus, a corporate lawyer from a wealthy family. Everything Melissa touched turned to gold. And I was just Daniel, the steady one, the reliable one, the one who helped Dad with the taxes every year and never caused any drama. Now here's where Daniel plants the first seed of something being off. He mentions this detail almost casually, but it caught my attention immediately. Since we were kids, Melissa had this thing where she'd borrow my stuff, not occasionally, constantly. My Game Boy when we were young, my car in high school, even though she had her own, my laptop in college when hers was acting weird, my apartment key when she was between places, and she'd always return things different. The Game Boy's save files deleted, my car with an empty gas tank and a new scratch, my laptop with my files reorganized, my apartment with things moved around. He says he never made a big deal of it. His parents would always say, "That's just Melissa. She's a free spirit. She doesn't think about these things." And Daniel internalized that. He convinced himself he was being uptight, controlling, too focused on the small stuff. But here's the thing about patterns, right? When you're in them, you don't see them. You just think it's how things are. Daniel describes his relationship with Melissa as close but distant. They'd talk every few weeks. She'd call when she needed something, advice on a work situation, help moving furniture, someone to vent to about Marcus during their rough patches. And Daniel would show up, because that's what brothers do. Now let's fast forward to 6 months before the wedding. Melissa gets engaged, and the whole family's over the moon. Marcus is from serious money. We're talking family owns multiple companies kind of money. The wedding is planned to be a massive affair, 300 guests, a venue that costs more than Daniel's annual salary, the works. And Melissa asked Daniel to be part of the wedding party. Not the best man, that's Marcus's brother, but an usher, and she wants him to give a toast at the reception. Daniel is honored. He says, "I spent weeks working on that toast. I wanted it to be perfect. I wanted to make Melissa proud. I interviewed our parents about childhood stories. I talked to her college friends. I even asked Marcus about their relationship milestones. I put my whole heart into it." So we've got the setup, right? Loving brother, successful sister, big fancy wedding. Everything seems normal. Maybe a little lopsided in terms of who gives more in the relationship, but nothing sinister. Until 3 months before the wedding, Daniel notices something. He's at Melissa's apartment helping her assemble wedding favors. Those little boxes of Jordan almonds, you know the type. And Melissa steps out to take a phone call. Her laptop is open on the kitchen counter, and Daniel glances at it while he's working. The screen shows a Google Doc. The title catches his eye, The Toast Backup. Now Daniel's confused because he's supposed to be giving a toast. He's been working on his for weeks, so his curiosity gets the better of him, and he scrolls through the document. It's a toast, but not his toast. It's for him. Instructions almost. Bullet points of stories he should tell. Specific phrases he should use. Even stage directions like pause here for laughter and make eye contact with Marcus's father during this line. Daniel feels this weird twist in his gut, but before he can process it, Melissa comes back. He doesn't say anything. He closes the laptop screen slightly and goes back to folding favor boxes. But the seed is planted. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was just trying to help me. Maybe she knew I was nervous about public speaking and wanted to give me a framework. That's what I told myself. Okay, let's pause here for a second because I want you to think about something. Have you ever had a moment where something felt off, but you couldn't quite articulate why? Where your brain was screaming that there's a pattern here, but you couldn't see the whole picture yet? That's where Daniel is. And honestly, if I found something like that, I think I'd do exactly what he did. I'd push it down and rationalize it away. But the human brain is funny. Once you notice one inconsistency, you start noticing others. After the Google Doc incident, Daniel can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. He doesn't confront Melissa. Instead, he starts observing, not in a creepy way. He's not spying on her or anything, but he's paying attention to things he used to overlook. 2 months before the wedding, Daniel is at his parents' house for Sunday dinner. Melissa's there too, talking about wedding plans. She's showing everyone photos of the venue, the floral arrangements, the cake. And then she tells this story about how she and Marcus met. Daniel's heard this story before, multiple times. It's part of Melissa's repertoire, the cute meet cute she tells at parties. But as she's telling it this time, Daniel realizes something. The story has changed. Small details, but they've shifted. In previous versions, Melissa said they met at a charity gala and bonded over a shared love of terrible white wine. But now she's saying they met at a work conference and bonded over their mutual hatred of networking events. Daniel almost interrupts her, almost says, "Wait, didn't you say it was a gala?" But he doesn't. He just watches his parents' faces as they nod and smile, not noticing the discrepancy at all. After dinner, he pulls up his phone and searches his text history with Melissa. He finds a conversation from 2 years ago where she first mentioned Marcus. And in that text, she describes meeting him at a mutual friend's birthday party. 3 different stories, 3 different first meetings. Now look, people misremember things. Memories are fallible. But this is her engagement story, the story she's told dozens of times, and it keeps changing. Daniel starts digging deeper. He goes back through old conversations, old emails, old social media posts, and he finds more inconsistencies, stories about her college years that contradict each other, job timelines that don't add up. Even small things like claiming to hate sushi in one conversation and posting about a favorite sushi restaurant in another. Again, on their own, these things are meaningless. We all contradict ourselves. We all have different versions of stories depending on the audience. But for Daniel, it's starting to form a picture. He writes, "It felt like Melissa was a collection of personas rather than a person, like she had different versions of herself for different situations, and she didn't even realize they weren't consistent. Or worse, she realized it and didn't care." 1 month before the wedding, Daniel decides to do something that feels a little invasive, but he justifies it to himself. He asks Marcus to grab coffee, just the two of them. He frames it as wanting to get to know his future brother-in-law better. They meet at a Starbucks, make small talk, And then Daniel, as casually as he can, asks Marcus about how he and Melissa met. Marcus tells the charity gala story, the white wine, the whole thing. But here's the kicker. Marcus mentions a specific detail that Melissa had never mentioned. He says that Daniel was actually supposed to be at that gala too. Melissa had bought 2 tickets and Daniel had canceled last minute because of a work emergency. Daniel has no memory of this. He goes home and checks his calendar from that time. There's no record of a gala, no canceled plans, no work emergency that week. He calls his mom, asks her if she remembers Melissa ever mentioning him being invited to a charity event with her around that time. His mom sounds confused. Honey, why are you asking about this? Just trying to remember something? Was I supposed to go to an event with Melissa about 3 years ago? I don't think so. You know Melissa doesn't usually invite you to her work things. She likes to keep her professional life separate. So the story Marcus knows, the story where Daniel was supposed to be there, is a fabrication. Melissa told Marcus that Daniel was supposed to attend, but it never happened. She created a version of events that included Daniel as a character, even though he wasn't there. Why would she do that? At this point, Daniel is losing sleep. He's going down a rabbit holes late at night, cross-referencing stories, trying to figure out what's real and what's what? Performance? Delusion? He considers confronting Melissa directly, but every time he thinks about it, he imagines how it'll go. She'll look at him with those big, earnest eyes and say he's misremembering, or she'll laugh it off as him being too literal. Or his parents will tell him he's being cruel, nitpicking his sister's happiness during what should be the most joyful time of her life. So he doesn't say anything. Instead, he keeps working on his toast, the toast he wants to give, not the one Melissa scripted for him. And he starts to notice something. Every story he wants to tell about Melissa, every happy memory he tries to include, has a weird shadow to it when he looks closer. That time she spontaneously threw him a surprise party for his 21st birthday, he finds texts showing she'd planned it weeks in advance and specifically told people not to tell Daniel so it would look spontaneous. That time she stood up for him when a family friend criticized his career choice, he finds an email where she'd actually agreed with the criticism behind his back, calling his job safe but uninspiring. That time she helped him get through a bad breakup, he realizes she'd been friends with his ex on social media and had been liking her posts about her new relationship before Daniel even knew they existed. Would you have kept digging at this point or let it go? Because I think most people would let it go. I think most people would tell themselves they're being paranoid, that they're overthinking. But Daniel is in too deep now. He's seen the pattern, and he can't unsee it. And then, 2 weeks before the wedding, something happens that changes everything. Daniel gets a call from an unknown number. He almost doesn't answer, but something tells him to pick up. It's a woman's voice. She introduces herself as Dr. Sarah Chen, and she says she's calling on behalf of Melissa. Daniel's heart drops. Is she okay? Did something happen? She's physically fine, Dr. Chen says, but she wanted me to reach out to you. I'm Melissa's therapist, and she's given me permission to speak with you about her treatment. Daniel is stunned. He had no idea Melissa was in therapy. She'd never mentioned it. Dr. Chen explains that Melissa has been seeing her for the past year and a half, working through what she describes as complex identity issues stemming from childhood. Apparently, Melissa grew up feeling an immense pressure to be perfect, to be the golden child everyone expected her to be. And over time, she developed what Dr. Chen calls adaptive personas. It's a coping mechanism, Dr. Chen explains. When someone feels they can't be authentically themselves and receive love, they create versions of themselves that they believe are more acceptable. Melissa has done this unconsciously for most of her life. She molds herself to fit what she thinks people want from her. Daniel is quiet, processing. This actually makes sense. All the inconsistencies, the different stories, the way Melissa seemed to be a different person depending on who she was with, it's explained. Dr. Chen continues, Melissa wanted me to call you specifically because she knows you've been noticing inconsistencies. She's been working very hard in therapy to integrate these different parts of herself into a more cohesive identity, but it's a process. The wedding has been a huge source of stress for her because it's forcing all of these different parts of her life to come together in one place. She's terrified you're going to expose her somehow. Expose her? Daniel asks. She thinks you've figured out that she's not, the way she describes it, not real. She's afraid you're going to tell everyone at the wedding that she's a fraud, that all her stories are made up, that she's been lying. Daniel feels a wave of guilt wash over him. He had been thinking about confronting her. He had been collecting evidence of her inconsistencies. But hearing it framed this way, as a mental health issue, as something she's actively working on with professional help, makes him feel like a villain. I wasn't going to expose her, he says quietly. I was just confused. I know, and Melissa knows that deep down, but her anxiety is telling her otherwise. I'm calling to ask if you'd be willing to come to a session with us before the wedding, just to talk through some of these concerns in a safe space. It might help both of you. Daniel agrees. Of course he agrees. This is his sister. If she's struggling with something, he wants to help. The session happens 3 days later. It's at Dr. Chen's office, a calm, neutral space with soft lighting and comfortable chairs. Melissa's already there when Daniel arrives, and she looks smaller somehow, vulnerable. She apologizes to Daniel. She tells him she knows she's been inconsistent, that she's been lying sometimes without even realizing it. She says she's trying to get better, trying to figure out who she really is underneath all the performance. I don't even know if there's a real me, she says, tears streaming down her face. I've been pretending for so long that I don't know what's authentic anymore. Daniel reaches across and takes her hand. He tells her he loves her. He tells her he's not angry, just worried about her. He promises he won't say anything at the wedding that would embarrass her or make her feel exposed. They hug. Dr. Chen talks them through some strategies for managing Melissa's anxiety during the wedding. Daniel leaves feeling lighter, feeling like he understands now. The pattern made sense. Melissa wasn't malicious, she was struggling, and he was going to support her through it. He goes home and completely rewrites his toast. He makes it gentle, affirming, celebrating Melissa, without including any specific stories that might contradict her current narrative. He focuses on wishing her and Marcus happiness, on expressing his love and support. The wedding day arrives. Daniel stands in his suit watching Melissa walk down the aisle. She looks radiant. Marcus looks overjoyed. Everything seems perfect. During the reception, Daniel gives his toast. It goes well. People clap. Melissa blows him a kiss from the head table. Daniel feels good. He feels like he did the right thing. And then during the dinner service, Daniel overhears something. He's standing near the bar waiting for a drink, and two of Melissa's college friends are talking behind him. They don't realize he's close enough to hear. One of them says, I can't believe she actually pulled it off. I mean, Marcus's family's loaded. This is everything Melissa ever talked about wanting. The other one laughs. Oh, I know. Remember junior year when she dated that guy from the investment banking firm? She used to practice being a corporate wife in her dorm room. She had a whole Pinterest board. She's always been good at becoming whoever she needs to be. It's honestly kind of impressive. Do you think Marcus knows? Knows what? That she's performing? Probably not. Most people don't notice. She's really good at it. They move away and Daniel stands there, drink in hand, feeling cold. I know what you're thinking. This seems solved, right? Melissa has identity issues. She adapts to situations. Dr. Chen explained it. It's a mental health thing. Daniel should be compassionate and move on. But something felt off to me when I first read this. And it did to the OP too. Because here's the thing. Dr. Chen's explanation framed Melissa as a victim of her own coping mechanisms. But what Daniel just overheard didn't sound like unconscious adaptation. It sounded like strategy. It sounded like Melissa knew exactly what she was doing. And that's when Daniel starts to realize the therapy story might be another persona. Okay, but here's the detail that broke the whole case open. Daniel can't stop thinking about the conversation he overheard. He pulls out his phone, and probably knowing he shouldn't, He starts searching for Dr. Sarah Chen online. He finds several psychologists with that name, but none in their area. None that match the office location where they had the session. He calls the number Dr. Chen called him from. It rings to a generic voicemail. No name, no identification. His stomach sinks. The next morning, the day after the wedding, Daniel drives to the address where the therapy session took place. It's a building downtown. When he walks in, there's a directory in the lobby. Suite 304, where they had the session, is listed as Rega's shared office space, available for rent by the hour. There is no Dr. Sarah Chen. Daniel stands in that lobby, and he says he felt like reality tilted sideways. Because if there was no therapist, then the entire explanation for Melissa's behavior, the thing that made him feel compassionate instead of betrayed, was a fabrication. Melissa had hired someone to play a therapist, or she'd played the therapist herself and used a voice modulator on the call. The whole session was staged to make Daniel feel guilty for noticing her inconsistencies, to reframe his valid concerns as him being insensitive to her mental health struggles. It wasn't a coping mechanism, it was damage control. Daniel sits in his car and goes through everything again with this new lens, and suddenly it all snaps into focus. The borrowed items that came back different, that wasn't carelessness. Melissa was testing boundaries, seeing what she could get away with, seeing if Daniel would ever push back or if he'd keep accepting whatever she did. The inconsistent stories, those weren't symptoms of fragmented identity. They were strategic rewrites. Melissa told people different versions of events depending on what made her look best in that context. She told Marcus that Daniel was supposed to be at the gala to make herself look generous, like she tried to include her brother. She told her parents different stories from her friends because they had different ideas of who she was. The Google Doc with the toast instructions? She wasn't trying to help Daniel. She was trying to control the narrative of her own wedding. Every speech, every moment, every perception, all of it scripted to present the exact image she wanted. And the therapy session? That was the most manipulative thing of all, because it weaponized Daniel's compassion. It made him the bad guy for noticing her behavior. It gave her a shield. I have mental health issues. You can't criticize me. That she could use whenever anyone got too close to seeing through her. Daniel writes, I realized that my entire relationship with my sister had been a performance. Not just some of it, not just the big moments, all of it. Every conversation we'd ever had, she'd been calculating how to present herself. And I'd been so eager to believe in the sister I thought I had that I'd ignored all the evidence showing me who she really was. But here's where it gets even darker. Daniel starts thinking about Marcus, about how Melissa had told him stories about her life that included details that never happened, about how she'd molded herself into exactly what Marcus's wealthy, traditional family would want in a wife. He thinks about Melissa's college friends joking about her practicing being a corporate wife, and he realizes Marcus doesn't know who he married. Nobody does, because Melissa has been so good at being whoever people want her to be that there might not be a real person underneath anymore. Or if there is, she's buried so deep under layers of performance that even Melissa herself can't find her. 3 weeks after the wedding, Daniel gets a text from Melissa. Family dinner at mom and dad's on Sunday. You're coming, right? He responds, I need to talk to you first. Can we meet? They agree to meet at a coffee shop. Neutral territory. When Melissa walks in, she's all smiles. She hugs Daniel and thanks him again for his beautiful toast. She asks if he's seen the wedding photos yet. She's already in full performance mode. Daniel decides to skip the preamble. I went to the building where we had the therapy session. Suite 304 is a rental office space. There's no Dr. Sarah Chen. Melissa's face doesn't change for a full 3 seconds. And in those 3 seconds, Daniel sees her calculating, trying to figure out which response will work best. Then she laughs. Oh my God, did I give you the wrong address? We changed locations last month. Dr. Chen moved to a new practice. Stop, Daniel says. Just stop. I know there's no therapist. I know you set that up to manipulate me into backing off. Melissa's expression shifts. The warm, vulnerable sister disappears. What's left is something cooler. Assessing. So what? She says. So I wanted to make sure you didn't ruin my wedding. So I gave you an explanation that would make you feel better. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with it? You fabricated a mental health crisis. You made me feel guilty for noticing that you lie. I don't lie, Melissa says, and her voice is sharp now. I adapt. I give people what they want to hear. Everyone does it. I'm just better at it than most people. That's not adapting. That's what, Daniel? That's what? She leans forward, and for the first time, Daniel sees something genuine in her face. It's anger. You think you're so morally superior because you're authentic? You know what being authentic got you? A mediocre job, a mediocre apartment, a mediocre life. Nobody cares about authenticity. They care about whether you make them feel good, whether you fit into their story. And I'm good at fitting. Daniel stares at her. Do you even love Marcus? Of course I love Marcus, she says, but there's no conviction in it. I love who I am when I'm with Marcus. I love the life we're going to have. That's not the same thing. It's close enough. They sit in silence. Finally, Daniel says, everyone needs to know. Marcus needs to know who he actually married. Melissa's eyes go cold. If you tell Marcus anything, I will destroy you. I will tell everyone you're having a mental breakdown, that you've been obsessed with me for years, that you tried to sabotage my wedding out of jealousy. And they'll believe me, Daniel, because I know how to tell a story and you don't. Daniel knows she's right. Melissa has spent her whole life crafting her image. She's better at this than he is, but he also knows he can't just do nothing. So he doesn't tell Marcus, not directly. Instead, he writes everything down. Every inconsistency, every contradiction, every fake story. He compiles it into a document, dates, screenshots, evidence. And he sends it to Marcus's personal email with a simple message. I thought you should know who you're building a life with. I'm not asking you to leave her. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just giving you information that I think you deserve to have. What you do with it is up to you. 3 days later, Daniel gets a call from his mother. She's crying. How could you do this? How could you send something so horrible to Marcus right after the wedding? Melissa's devastated. She says you're trying to ruin her marriage. Did Marcus tell you what I sent him? He won't talk to anyone. But Melissa said you sent him lies about her, that you've been making up stories because you're jealous. Mom, did you even ask to see what I sent? I don't need to see it. I know my daughter, and I know she wouldn't lie to me. That's when Daniel understands. Melissa has already gotten ahead of this. She's already told her version of events, and everyone believes her because they've always believed her. Daniel gets cut off. His parents stop returning his calls. Extended family members block him on social media. Melissa posts a vague but pointed message on Facebook about toxic family members and protecting your peace, and it gets hundreds of supportive comments. Marcus never responds to Daniel's email. Daniel doesn't know if he even read it, and Daniel is left completely alone, holding the truth and watching everyone else live in Melissa's carefully constructed fiction. Daniel ends his Reddit post like this. It's been 3 weeks. I haven't spoken to anyone in my family. Some of Melissa's friends have sent me messages calling me cruel, delusional, pathetic. A few of Marcus's family members threaten legal action for defamation, though nothing's come of it yet. I lie awake at night wondering if I did the right thing. Part of me thinks I should have just kept my mouth shut. Let Melissa and Marcus build their life together. Maybe he would have been happy not knowing. Maybe ignorance really is bliss. But the bigger part of me knows that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to tell the truth. Even if no one believes it. The weirdest part is that I miss her. I miss the sister I thought I had. Even though I know now that she was never real, I still grieve her. I grieve the relationship I thought we had. I grieve the family dinners and the inside jokes and the shared history that now feels tainted. Sometimes I wonder if Melissa even knows she's doing it anymore. If she's performed for so long that she's lost track of where the performance ends and the person begins. Or if there was ever a person at all, if maybe she's just been a mirror her whole life, reflecting back whatever people want to see. I don't regret sending that email to Marcus, but I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my sister became someone I couldn't trust. I regret that family turned out to mean less than image. Mostly I regret that I didn't see the pattern sooner, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And now I'm looking at my own life, my own relationships, wondering how many other patterns I've been blind to, wondering who else might be performing for me, wondering if I've been performing too, in smaller ways. The truth is isolating, but I guess I'd rather be isolated and aware than connected and deceived. The post ended there. Thousands of comments, some calling Daniel a hero, some calling him a vindictive asshole, some sharing their own stories of family members who turned out to be different than they thought. But one comment stuck out to me. It was from a therapist, a real one, presumably, and they wrote, "What you're describing sounds like it could be narcissistic personality disorder or even antisocial personality disorder. People with these conditions can be highly intelligent and socially skilled. They learn to mimic emotional responses and craft personas that get them what they want. They're not necessarily evil, but they lack the internal emotional reality that most people have. Everything is strategic. Everything is calculated. And when you expose them, they're extremely good at making you look like the villain because they've spent their whole lives studying how to manipulate social perception." Reading that, something clicked for me about this story because the scariest part isn't that Melissa is manipulative. It's that she's good at it. It's that she functioned in the world successfully for almost 3 decades without anyone noticing. It's that even now, after being exposed, she's managed to maintain her image and isolate the one person who saw through her. That's the true horror of this story. Not the lying itself, but how effective the lying was. Daniel never got his family back. In an update posted 2 months later, he mentioned that Melissa was pregnant and everyone was celebrating. His mother sent him a single text. "You're going to be an uncle. I hope you can put your jealousy aside and be happy for your sister." He didn't respond. As far as Marcus goes, Daniel never found out if he read the email or if he just chose to ignore it. Sometimes people don't want the truth if it means destroying the life they built. And Melissa, as far as anyone can tell, she's living her perfect life. Beautiful home, wealthy husband, baby on the way, Instagram posts that get hundreds of likes. Everyone thinks she's got it all figured out. Everyone except Daniel. So here's what I want to leave you with. This story makes me wonder, how well do we really know the patterns of our own lives? Because here's the thing. Daniel spent 32 years with his sister. 32 years of shared memories, family dinners, and late-night phone calls. And it turned out that most of it was performance. It turned out that the person he thought he knew was a carefully constructed fiction. That's terrifying. But it's also a reality for more people than we'd like to admit. How many relationships are we in where we're only seeing what someone wants us to see? How many times have we ignored inconsistencies because acknowledging them would mean questioning everything we thought we knew? And even more uncomfortably, how often are we the ones performing? How often do we adapt ourselves to fit what we think others want from us? Is that just normal social behavior, or is it something more insidious? I think the line between healthy adaptation and manipulative performance is intention. When we adjust ourselves to be kind, to be considerate, to make others comfortable, that's empathy. But when we adjust ourselves purely strategically, to extract something from others, to control how they perceive us at the expense of any authentic connection, that's manipulation. Melissa crossed that line, and the tragedy is that she probably didn't even realize she'd crossed it. Or maybe she did and just didn't care because the performance had become her reality. But here's what I keep coming back to. Daniel is alone now. He has the truth, but he's paid for it with every relationship he had. And I can't help but wonder, was it worth it? I'm not saying he should have stayed silent. I'm not saying he should have let Marcus marry someone under false pretenses, but I am saying that sometimes the truth costs more than we're prepared to pay. So I want to ask you, have you ever had a tiny inconsistency in someone's story that led to a big truth? Have you ever noticed a pattern in someone's behavior that made you question everything you thought you knew about them? And if you did you speak up or did you let it go? Let me know in the comments. And if you've got your own story about family members who weren't who you thought they were, share it. Maybe it'll help someone else feel less alone in that isolating moment of realization. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as thought-provoking as I did, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the most psychologically complex Reddit stories. And remember, patterns are everywhere. Once you start seeing them, you can't stop. I'll see you in the next one.